Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Meka Whaiteri.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, o tira tēnā tātou katoa. Mr Speaker, it's my honour to take a call on this very important piece of legislation, the Environmental Reporting Bill 2014. Mr Speaker, the aim of the bill is to provide for environmental reports, including the type of information and its quality and timing. When the Minister of Environment, Mr Speaker, commented on the introduction of this bill, she stated then that New Zealand was one of the only a few OECD countries that did not require independent reporting on the state of the environment. The media release stated that the scope of the proposed reports will be comprehensive, going beyond the current non-statutory program of environmental indicator updates, and would cover not just the state of the environment, but also describe the pressures driving environmental trends and the impact of these trends. Comprehensive information will be provided on 5 key environmental domains: air, climate, atmosphere, freshwater, marine and land, and with biodiversity as a theme across all the domains. Mr Speaker, one of environmental domain reports will be released every 6 months, and a comprehensive synthesis report covering all environmental domains will be released every 3 years. Mr Speaker, I needed to remind myself the importance of such a bill. Mr Speaker, in this House, when we debate legislation, we tend to either support or oppose. As I stand here, Mr Speaker, there's almost a third position, which is yes, but not quite. It's unfortunate on this side, not it's fortunate on the Labour side, that we stand opposed to this bill for the very reasons that my honourable colleagues, Reno Tirikatini and Dr Megan Wood, have raised, which wasn't just raised from our side, Mr Speaker, was actually raised in the course of the Select Committee hearings, where over 300 submissions made it very, very clear that this issue of this particular legislation didn't have the independence that submitters were seeking. So, Mr Speaker, I cannot support this piece of legislation because it does not go far enough in ensuring that the ministers of both environment are not involved in setting both what those priority indicators are for both the statistician and the Ministry of Environment to report on. Like I said, Mr Speaker, over 300 submitters are submitted to the Select Committee process. In both Dr Megan's contribution to this bill, she highlighted 2 particular submitters that I'd like to again emphasise what they said. Clearly, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Dr Jan Wright, clearly in her submission, Mr Speaker, made it clear that the independence issue was critical for this legislation to have the impact that we also desire, which is independent environmental reporting on issues that make up an important component of our economy, which is the environment, Mr Speaker. And what did Dr Wright actually say? Mr Speaker, she made it really clear that that she felt that the bill itself did not offer the level of independence that a piece of legislation should provide. She made it really clear that she did not think that that was actually a satisfactory function for her to play that role, given her statutory function within the piece of legislation. But what she was seeking was a more independent voice that set the tone of these reports. So clearly, Mr Speaker, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, in her own submission, made it clear that more independence was needed to ensure that this piece of legislation wasn't interfered politically. Another major group, Mr Speaker, that submitted during this submission process was the Environmental Defence Society, who, quote, said, Allowing ministers to select topics to be covered in synthesis reports and domain reports will politicise what should be an independent process, as topic selection could be utilised to introduce bias into environmental reporting. Like I said, Mr. Speaker, many submitted. I wanted to highlight those particular submitters because of the standing they have in the environmental space, to ensure that we are putting through legislation that can uphold the very purpose in which it has been presented to the House. Mr. Speaker, I want to comment on the government's chairperson of the Environmental Select Committee, who in his presentation or his debate contribution made the statement that this side was opposing a piece of legislation simply for the sake of opposing. Unfortunately, that's the role of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that all pieces of legislation that comes through this House has gone through the proper process of a Select Committee, but more importantly, has factored into the submissions that were presented to the Select Committee. And it's concerning, Mr. Speaker, that the chairperson of that Select Committee has made the statement in terms of our members that sit on that Select Committee, who uphold the submitters that come to the Select Committee. And yes, as you know, in all Select Committees, the government members outnumber the opposition members, and it's clearly come through with this piece of legislation coming to the House for the second reading. What I contend, Mr. Speaker, is unless we acknowledge the importance of the Select Committee process in designing robust legislation, then we are almost sending a signal to future submitters, Mr. Speaker, that whatever their concerns or the submissions are, and in this case the majority have asked for independence, that this House or this government is simply not listening. Mr. Speaker, in terms of coming back to the bill, Labor supports the need for independent environmental reporting, but the bill falls well short of that requirement. It is fundamentally flawed. Labor is disappointed to oppose this bill, as we believe it is a vital piece of legislation to protect our environment. And like earlier mentioned, for too long, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand has lagged well behind international best practice. We are the only country in the OECD without an ongoing commitment in law to independently and regularly monitoring the state of our environment. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that our colleague again, Dr. Megan Woods, in her reading, offered up a supplementary order, Order number 74, where she wanted to suggest that we remove the ministers from making the decision and replace the minister with both the chief executives of the Ministry of Environment and the Minister of Statisticians, thereby ensuring that there is no politicising, there's no political interference in both the priorities we set, that this legislation in terms of environmental impacts will be safeguarded, Mr. Speaker. And I really do wish that we had taken that supplementary to heart when this legislation was coming to the House, but it was not to be, Mr. Speaker. It again smacks of hidden agendas of this government that we've seen time and time again, a bit out of touch, a bit of promising with one hand and taking away with the other. But our environment, Mr. Speaker, can I end in saying that it's an important part of who we are as New Zealanders. We are its guardians, the kaitiakis. What legislation we bring in this House must guarantee that at the end of the passing of any legislation, that we protect our environment, that we leave it in a better state than what we've inherited, particularly for the future generations. Mr. Speaker, I oppose this bill. Kia ora tātou.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Todd Muller.
Thank you, Mr.